Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar of our Massachusetts Deconstruction Work Group. My name is Kathy Mirza, and I am the Branch Chief for Municipal Waste Reduction Programs at MassDEP. We've been holding quarterly webinars since September of 2022, and we invite in subject matter experts from different parts of the building reuse and deconstruction space so that we can share experience and resources, connect stakeholders from all different perspectives, learn together, and take some meaningful steps to support the growth of the reuse industry here in Massachusetts. Today's meeting will focus on workforce development and deconstruction, and we have a terrific panel of speakers who are really leading the way on these efforts. Now, before we dive in, I would like to review a few housekeeping reminders. First, please note that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all attendees that come today. We also post it on MassDEP's website. We also ask that your name and organization be visible on screen so we know who's here. If you're not familiar with Zoom, if you would please click on the three dots in the top right corner of your image and just rename yourself. Or you can click on the participants icon and name yourself there. Please keep your microphone on mute during the presentations to help minimize any background noise. And of course, if you have any questions or information to share, resources, good links throughout the presentations, please put those in the chat box. If you have questions for a specific speaker, you could make note of that when you put the question in. And we will be reserving time at the end of the meeting for questions that we have and questions from the audience as well. So we usually start our meetings here by launching two quick polls so that we can see who else here is on the call. We wouldn't have time to go around the room with such a large audience. So our first poll that Leah is going to launch asks you what sector you work in. So she's going to launch that. And if you could just take a moment to respond. Here we go. And if you may need to scroll down because there are about 9 or 10 choices. So we have, I think, 9 or 10 in total. Oh, did the poll disappear? It says off someone's screen. I still see it on my screen. That's interesting. But it looks like it stopped. Only about a third of the folks participated, and someone says they see the results. I wonder if we could relaunch that by.
Let me try that.
Yeah. Right now I'm seeing the results. There we go.
Just
So,
relaunched.
yep, she relaunched. Thank you all. Thanks for letting us know that. Great. I'll give you another second or two. It looks like most people have reported. We have about 3/4 who responded. Just a quick check of what sector you are. Excellent. I think we're pretty close to full, so we can end it there and share the results out so folks can see who's here. So there's a little sampling from a variety of spaces, but I'm really glad to see that we have folks here from workforce development as well, because we've had light attendance for some of our previous meetings. So thank you very much. We could stop sharing that. And then we have the second poll. The second poll is really quick, yes or no. This is really about whether we can share your contact information with other attendees from this work group who have asked to reach out. Most people are fine with that because it provides an opportunity to network and connect. But if you would prefer that we do not share your email, we will not do that. So if you could just take a moment and respond to this, whether it's okay to share your contact info. we do keep track of this too in a larger database so that we respect your request going forward. Okay, any last minute? We're pretty close. Okay, I'd say we end it there. Thank you. And most people are comfortable sharing, which is fine. And those that aren't, we'll mark it that way. So thank you. We have about 160 that registered for the call today. So we expect a lot of participation from a wide range of folks. We really encourage you to chime into the conversation, put your questions in the chat. We have a lot of work to do together in this space. So quick introduction for those who are new to this deconstruction work group. MassDEP established a reduce and reuse working group a couple of years ago as part of our 2020 to 2030 solid waste master plan. So in 2021, we released the state's first reduce and reuse action plan. And with that, we're directing more of our attention and resources to the reduction of waste so we can explore our opportunities to keep these valuable materials in circulation through reuse programs. Now, through a number of stakeholder meetings leading up to the action plan, we identified building materials as a priority stream for reuse. This led to the development of this deconstruction work group. As some of you may know, our kickoff meeting was almost 2 years ago now. It was September of 2022. We've held 6 webinars so far, and each of these webinar meetings have featured a different topic that allow us to take a deep dive into some key issues and some resources that can enable growth in building reuse. This is a slide that just shows you who our planning team is. It's changed a little bit over time. A few folks have moved on to different ventures, and we've had a few new folks join us. We have a wonderful team that represents industry, nonprofits, officials from federal, state, and local governments as well. And these are the leaders and practitioners who are bringing their vision and experience to this work. We are very grateful to have their time and expertise to help support this vibrant work group. A quick snapshot of our goals are listed on this slide. While DEP uses a waste reduction lens for the work that we do, our goals really do dovetail with a variety of sectors. So these meetings really are meant to educate and share knowledge across different stakeholder groups as we explore things like reuse market opportunities, workforce development, historic preservation, as well as policies and incentives to help us move forward. So as mentioned, we've held 6 meetings since September of 22. And on this slide, I've noted just the topics that we've explored deeply at each of those webinars. If you missed any of these meetings, all of the recordings and presentations can be found on DEP's website at the link provided on the slide where it says archives. So we'll be sharing out this deck. So now I would like to hand the floor over to Michael Orbank, who's from our planning team, so that he can introduce today's topic and our speakers.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Orbank. I'll be looking to set the scene for today's webinar. Just for some context, I work as a sustainability manager for the Northeast for the STO Building Group, representing Structure Tone in the Boston area. And I'm also part of the Carbon Leadership Forum of Boston, leading their reuse subcommittee. Next slide, please. So just to set the stage, I wanted to give some useful terminology to make sure everyone is familiar. So when we're talking about C&D waste, which will be brought up, really that's looking to the waste generated through both construction and demolition activities. Demolition being the process of tearing down buildings or other artificial structures. Deconstruction, a little different than that. That's the process of carefully and mindfully disassembling, preserving, and reusing the elements of buildings to really extract the maximum value and not kind of sending them off to eventually be landfilled. You'll hear embodied carbon and know that that is the carbon impacts that are inherent to a material. So that's through the extraction, manufacturing, transportation, useful life, and then end of life of a product. Really, what is that carbon that is within that material? And then lastly, why we're here, we're looking at workforce development, really looking at the process that a region's kind of economic stability is enhanced through focusing on the workers and those who are doing the work in the workforce materials instead of strictly looking at the business impacts. Next slide, please. So when looking at deconstruction, really, why are we talking about this? So C&D waste is a problem, and it's a growing problem. About 40% of all of US solid waste is coming from C&D, and of that, demolition makes about 90% of that waste. In Massachusetts and in New England more broadly, there's dwindling landfill capacity, and many projections within the next 10, 15 years, there will be no landfill capacity for a lot of this waste to go to. We do know that in areas, other areas of the country and the world where deconstruction has kind of got off the ground and has some legs, there are environmental benefits, really kind of reducing that embodied carbon load and the emissions from transporting all these new virgin materials. There's economic benefits of resale, and there's a lot of social and cultural benefits, kind of keeping materials regional, making sure that they're kind of put back into communities who need them most, and really making sure that we're limiting the environmental justice impacts of communities that are next to landfills and are usually most impacted by them. And oftentimes there's a huge unrealized value of these materials in reuse, whether looking at the financial costs or the carbon costs for the construction industry, what is the lead time or how long it takes these materials to get to the job site, and really looking at material health. In the past couple of years, there's been quite a laser focus on what is the material health impacts, especially around VOCs or volatile organic compounds. We know that reused materials have off-gassed these already, and oftentimes can be seen as a bit healthier. Real quick, you'll see the photo there. That is of Resource Roxbury, located right outside of Boston. And that is probably one of the best C&D waste processors in the region because they're RCI certified through third party. And you'll see even there, so much waste that could be pulled out, but is instead put together, commingled, and most eventually being sent to landfill or incineration. Next slide, please. So to really bring this home, this was a report sent out by the MassDEP looking at kind of different processors in Massachusetts. And really what I'll look to highlight here is if you see that red, those are all the materials that were eventually landfilled or disposed of. And you'll see that each one of the processors, it is a majority of the materials that are being processed out. So the hope with deconstruction is to make sure not only do these materials never really even go to these processors, but that we're really reducing those lines and finding better uses for this, because currently we seem to be going in the wrong direction with both solid waste and C&D materials going to landfill. Next slide. So when looking at the current landscape right now in Massachusetts, we'll take a first look at residential. We see that it is a bit sporadic and one-off when requested. Maybe a crew from outside can come in from a different part of the country, but oftentimes it's very niche. If the owner really requests it, if it is something that is needed to be done for a study, it can be done. But really, we're seeing that there's a lack of defined training and oftentimes very inconsistent requirements for kind of how it should be done or where it should be done. When looking at a commercial, I would say deconstruction is not typical at all, and that the industry is really dominated by the thought of demolition in a very linear way of thinking, the take, make, and waste. Oftentimes because it is atypical, there's a lot of perceived risks and barriers that will really stop the process in its before it even gets going, because very few will want to take that first step, as it's seen as very risky. And then there's really no policy movement currently. And if that is the case, I think a lot of the industry says, well, why should we change if there's nothing kind of forcing our hands and there's no incentives to do it? But we've seen in areas where deconstruction does have policy support, does have industry support, that it's really a key to unlocking circularity. It helps designers and design teams really know that they have materials that they can put back into projects. Construction can know really what they can pull out and how exactly they can send this off to be reused. We see in other areas where deconstruction is more developed that reuse vendors are not kind of small and residential only focused, that they can grow and they can really be a tool for not only the community but the industry. And we see that policy development with proper incentivization can really spur this through not only, as we're talking today, workforce development, but really achieve a lot of the decarbonization goals that many climate action plans are looking to put forward. Next slide. So lastly, as you listen to this webinar, just some questions to keep in mind. Really think about what differences exist in training demolition versus deconstruction. Really start to look at what are these first steps in transitioning a workforce, especially in Massachusetts, where it is so nascent and underdeveloped. Asking really through the speakers, how can deconstruction relate to historic preservation? And really, how can it support and ally with climate action and decarbonization to achieve many of the goals that we all have for the built environment? Our speakers today, we have Dave Bennick with the Building Deconstruction Institute. We also have Katie Fitzhugh from Repurpose Savannah, Brock Leyendecker from the North Benetry School, and then Randy Scott will be speaking on the practitioner side from Select Demo and Hancock Academy. I believe Dave Bennick signed on, so he'll be the first one we'll go to. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So, yeah, I'm Dave Bennick, Deconstruction Dave. I'm going to refer to myself in the third person, I guess, from now on. So let's go to the next slide. It's actually a trick. It just makes my logo spin. Oh, next slide. Okay, so a lot of people say, what is it that I'm doing? I'm going to turn the video off. What is it that I'm doing, and how is it that this relates to workforce development? So I am a deconstruction contractor. I've been deconstructing buildings for 31 and a half years. So we just keep rolling. And we've worked on 5,000 plus job sites now. We saved over 100 million pounds from the landfill. So we do know deconstruction. And the thing is, I also am a store owner. I have a reuse store. It is a training center more than a store, but it is somewhere where people come to learn how to run reuse stores. And we are open to the public, so it's a real reuse store, and that's the best place to learn. I'm also a consultant. I've helped out all over North America, 12 different countries, and helped with a lot of projects. Workforce development, we are constantly training people, either businesses or workforce development training programs where we're training workers to be in this industry. So next slide. And so in total, we've helped 236 circular businesses, we're up to 98 now. 98, we've helped 98 reuse businesses get started. And I can't wait to get to 100. So I don't know what happens when I get to 100, probably nothing, but then we'll be looking forward to 101 and so on. But, a big part of what we're doing is workforce development. One of the things that we see in our training programs is what is working and what isn't working. What can we improve on? We have a workforce training coming up in King County later this month. It is going to be awesome. It is going to incorporate everything we've learned about deconstruction, the workforce training. Sorry, I'm getting messages all over the screen, so it's hard to stay focused. Anyway, next slide. So what we did is we started a reuse store, and we started deconstructing buildings, and we started repairing things, and we started remanufacturing products, and we did all of that in-house, and we did all of that by ourselves. And at some point we had 50 people working, and we had 2 stores. That's back when I was running a nonprofit. And so then I realized, after helping everybody, that the Reuse Innovation Center model is better. It's the idea of, instead of having one reuse business, you have 10 reuse businesses working together. But what ends up happening when it comes to workforce training at our Reuse Innovation Centers, you can learn from each of those different businesses that are involved. So it's almost like a business collective, but it's a circular business collective. And when you have a training, you could have the trainees go work with each business and learn that aspect of the industry. So that might be repair, it might be remanufacturing, it might be deconstruction or marketing or warehousing or running a store. So it's really been great to incorporate the benefits of the Reuse Innovation Center with the training, because it basically getting 7 trainings in one, maybe 8 in one. Go ahead, next slide. And I guess this just also covers what I was just saying. You know, one of the things, you know, that I didn't mention was historic preservation. That is a big part of what we're doing. Deconstructing buildings and having them be reassembled, or saving older materials to help fix up other historic buildings. And of course, all of our trainees are hearing about these things, as well as the environmental aspects, and they're learning about how we're protecting the environment. But the bottom line is, if you expose your trainees to all of these different things, it's almost like you give them a choice of what career they might want to follow. And so that's why I think it's many times better than our original training platform that we came up with. So this is an advanced, evolved version, and it's working great. So I can't wait to start another one later this month. We also have businesses that we're getting started in Vermont and Massachusetts and the Hudson Valley and Long Island and things like that. But let's go to the next slide. So we actually did a comparison one time. I'm not going to say that, take this number with a grain of salt. How about that? We did a project one time where we partnered with a demolition contractor, and that demolition contractor bid the job as a demolition contractor and said, this is what I would have done. And then we deconstructed it. We worked together to make that happen. And it was 10 structures. And see, what happened was we compared how many hours we would have put in, we did put in, versus how many they would have put in if it was demolished. And it was 20 times more labor hours that were put in via deconstruction. And the benefits of deconstruction all paid for those hours, you know, like the money coming in paid for that. But it was interesting to see how many hours more. So there was a lot more jobs created in that way. Next slide. So, you know, this is a workforce training we did in Baltimore, where the mayor of Baltimore asked us to come in and do a training and on row houses, you know, and it was, you know, it really was striking, like how we were changing lives, especially for this gentleman who loved, you know, the work, and understood that he was making a change in his own life. And so, you know, it's funny, I go to different parts of the country and I talk about different benefits. Sometimes it's environmental protection, sometimes it's jobs, sometimes it's historic preservation. But a lot of times it is so rewarding, no matter what it is. And a lot of times you get multiple benefits all at the same time. You don't have to choose one, you can get all of them. So next slide. I was involved with the Portland, Oregon Deconstruction Ordinance. I was involved right off the bat. They hired me as a consultant to help create the ordinance and to help do the training and do workforce training there as well. And so that ordinance has been a model for other communities. They've adopted what, or watched what we did in Portland, and then tried to copy that and adjust it for their own community. But we have seen a number of jobs that came out of that. At least 100 jobs, I would say, were generated for the industry by that ordinance. And it's, you know, they've maintained a certain pace of building removal and ancillary, you know, sort of reuse stores and furniture makers and things like that that accompany all of that supply that's come in now. So, and in fact, now Lake Oswego, a neighboring city, has adopted a similar ordinance or a similar, actually an incentive program. And I was just down there helping with another building. So it's catching on. So next slide. This is the one that I'm obviously a lot of people are excited about. I'm definitely excited. So we are, I know today we're talking about workforce training. So we are dealing with what I think is the largest workforce training, green collar job training program in the United States. It is 400,000 green collar jobs that New York City wants to create over a period of time. And a lot of those jobs are going to be new jobs that like deconstruction. So part of their efforts in New York City were to start a circular construction program where deconstruction is mandated on certain job sites, and it is catching on. So we started with one project which is this $2.1 billion project in Manhattan. I basically have to deconstruct, I have to figure out how to deconstruct a 550,000 square foot building that's in the middle of Manhattan and create, you know, hundreds of jobs probably at the same time while starting new reuse businesses to support this single project. But then you go, okay, well, but we're already up to 5 projects now, because once you do one project and you start talking to people about it, then other people want to join in and they want to take advantage of all of the work that we're doing, all the resources that we're creating and infrastructure and things like that. So we expect by the end of July that we will have 20 different projects that we're tracking and interacting with, that it's part of this circular construction program, and that's going to grow over time, and that we will deconstruct, you know, millions of square feet over time, as well as create a lot of jobs. We're going to have to train up a whole army of people to do that. So very exciting. Next slide. Oh, that's it.
That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. We'll have you stick around till after for the moderated Q&A, but definitely very exciting on that Kips Bay project. Next, we'll move on to Katie Fitzhugh with Repurposed Savannah.
Had to unmute myself. Oh, hi everybody. Thanks for that, Michael. As introduced right there, my name is Katie Fitzhugh, and I'm the Director of Deconstruction for Repurposed Savannah, and currently one of the two the interim co-executive directors. So a lot of changes are happening over here on our side. So I just want to tell you all a little bit about who Repurposed Savannah is, what we are, why we are, how we are, all the things. And ultimately how we attack workforce training and workforce development. So next slide, please, Kathy. Thank you. All right, so at Repurposed Savannah, we are a Women Plus led 501c3. We mainly promote a sustainable alternative to traditional demolition through deconstruction, salvage, and the reuse of historic building materials. Next slide, please. So we like to say our mission statement is a 3-leaf clover. So we have 3 different aspects to it. It's the first being training women plus, or underrepresented individuals in the construction and demolition and deconstruction industry. The second being sustainability, and then the third being historical preservation through salvage and reuse. So I have this 90% statistic because 90% of the construction and demolition and deconstruction workforce are men. So that means 10% of that workforce is women. And less than that 10%, it's like 2% of that 10% represent women who work in the field. So here at Repurpose Savannah, we put a lot of time and effort into training women and, like I said, underrepresented humans. Next slide, please, Kathy. All right, so this is a photo of my crew. We've had some changes since this photo was taken, but we've trained roughly 20 people on our crew in the past 6 years. Our retention rate is really fantastic. We've had some really people on for the long haul, and then subsequently others that went on and started different businesses and continued to deconstruct in their own lives, and things like that. So one really fun thing, just really quick, is Repurpose Savannah we just got approved for a very large scale apprenticeship. It was just approved on the federal level, so we're going to be implementing that and subsequently hoping to train a lot more people in deconstruction, especially women, and things like that. So next slide, please, Kathy. All right, so Michael kind of touched on this earlier about how much waste is produced from C&D materials. And it's about 1/3 of the world's waste comes from those two industries. It's a really gross number. It's aggressive. And as he said, our landfills are becoming full. We also have no standard in how we track waste. And it differs state to state. It differs county to county. So we're constantly trying to find what that national number is, and I have yet to find it. So next slide, please. Michael and I have similar photos of big machines on heaps of trash. But just to reiterate and just to really drive home, our landfills are getting too full. We need to we need to continue and growing this industry so more people can deconstruct historic structures and just modern structures, any structure in lieu of traditional demolition. So at Repurpose Savannah, we're not quite on Dave's scale at all because he's rocking and rolling these amazing commercial structures. We're still pretty small, slowly getting there. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So one thing at Repurpose Savannah that differs from a few other deconstruction companies is our efforts in like true focus on historic preservation and salvaging materials for the circular economy to be used in plethora of different ways. So last year in 2024, Repurpose Savannah kept 475 tons of historic building materials out of our landfills. Next slide, please. All right. This is a photo of Kelly Lowe. She's our salvage director. This is how we keep our materials at our lumber yard. We put a lot of time and effort into denailing them, culling materials, cutting them, making them, visually accessible to the large array of people who come in to purchase materials, right? So we're not only selling wholesale, we're selling to Joe Schmo who's working on his home or her home, and trying to find materials that they can use in that space as well. So we try and make it look pretty and look almost immediately reusable, because we all know that reused materials, they don't always have a linear life. Doors, sure, more often than not, a door, it was a door and it goes into being a door again. Unlike potentially 2x4s and 2x6s and things like, that were historically structurally appropriate versus in modern code. In a lot of places, historic structured materials can't be reused as structural materials. So it's harder for a stud to become a stud, if that makes sense. So next slide, please. All right, so at Repurpose Savannah, we are always training. We're training in-house, but we're growing on a national and international level of training and workforce development. So next slide, please. So we've been quite a few places, nothing like Dave's scale, like I said, but just so you all know, we are one of Dave's statistics because he came down and he trained us, and then we subsequently learned and developed, and now we train others. So we've been to San Antonio. They actually just passed one of the largest deconstruction ordinances. So we go down there once a year and we do a deconstruction training. We've trained about 60 actually 75, excuse me, people, deconstruction technicians, demo contractors, real estate agents, quite a broad array of people who are interested in being trained in deconstruction. So we've also been to Atlanta, Georgia, where we partnered with Life Cycle Building Center, and we ran their workforce development project.
Katie, your signal's in and out. It's silent right now.
Okay, hold on. Me too. All right, is it better?
Give it a go. You keep coming in and out, but mostly you're in. So I just wanted to let you know. Yep, give it a try.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Everyone is now bumped off the Wi-Fi, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so we've also been to, well, did you hear Atlanta?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we also partnered with Conway, South Carolina, a company out of that area. And so we've worked with municipalities, individual companies, and just individual humans who are interested in training as well. So you can see we have Ontario, Canada. That's Meredith Moore out of Ontario. She lives up in Toronto, and her company is Aurora Bora Deconstruction. So she came down rather than bringing us to Canada, and she trained with us on one of our job sites with our crew and got to see really how it runs efficiently on a repurposed job site. So that one was really cool, and it was amazing to have to host. But everybody is amazing hosts as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, so these are the different things that we really try to drive home in our Repurpose Savannah deconstruction workforce training opportunities and programs. You can see how deconstruction includes many more aspects to it than traditional demolition, which is just, inspect, get an estimate, demo, go home. Deconstruction has so much more to that.
Wi-Fi again, Katie. Sorry to just have to say it. You've locked up.
Maybe cut the camera.
Um,
Maybe if you cut your camera off, that might
yeah,
work better.
good idea. Katie, if you would turn your video off, that might give you more bandwidth.
And then we have, okay, hold on. I'm so sorry, hold on.
Yeah, try.
Can you hear me now, Kathy?
Yeah, turn the
Can you
video.
hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, if you try turning your video off, there you go.
Perfect. Let's try that. All right. Okay, so back to how we do things. So we start from the top, right? How do you inspect your structures? How do you know what you're looking for? What is salvageable versus, things that are less salvageable, right? Like we don't have an output for plaster recycling down here. That's something usually I have to can. Asphalt shingles, we also in Savannah, we don't have an outlet for that just yet. Keyword being yet. We want more partners to salvage more and recycle more. Secondly, salvage audit, we take all this information, we send it up, we get an appraisal estimate from it that the client then can take and use in their taxes. Repurpose Savannah, we put a lot of time and effort into documentation and research. So we 3D scan every structure. We get elevations, floor plans, photos, and then we also partner with a preservation firm to do the deep dive of the history of every structure that we deconstruct. So a lot of time and effort is put into making sure that while you're losing the ability to interact with this structure in the built environment, you don't lose the ability in the virtual reality of interacting with the structures. Fourth is we teach people how to deconstruct, right? There are so many tricks to a crowbar that don't just come naturally that you would sometimes, at least when I started deconstructing, I wouldn't have ever thought of. So there are some really nice tricks to the trade, and we really try to show our workforce development humans, we really try to start them out 5 steps ahead rather than at step 0, because we've already made those mistakes and we're not gonna, just send you out to sink or swim. We're really going to swim next to you. The fifth is we teach people how to process and salvage the materials, right? So what are you looking for when you're looking at historic materials that you can't reuse? What do you need to cut out of historic materials to make sure that you're not bringing bugs home, things like that. And then lastly, we report. We are meticulous in documenting and tracking the tonnage of materials that we've diverted on that project. So next slide, please. Oh, okay, perfect. I was just missing one. All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Next, we'll go to Brock Leyendecker with the North Banner Street School, talking about historic preservation and deconstruction.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. As the slide says, my name is Brock Leyendecker. I'm an instructor of carpentry here at the North Banner Street School. I'm a graduate of our preservation carpentry program, and that's what I do outside of the classroom. I also teach a course in traditional building techniques for the Boston Architectural College, and I'm a member of the Timber Framers Guild of America. Next slide, please. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how we handle deconstruction and why we use it in our curriculum at North Bennett Street School in our carpentry and preservation carpentry programs. Deconstruction, excuse me, is a vital component in our historic preservation carpentry program because that's a large and incredibly important aspect of preserving structures these days. We have to be able to dismantle, which is the term we tend to use more than deconstruct, dismantling structures so that we can repair them, so that we can stabilize them. And this is sometimes major deconstruction, or sometimes it's incredibly small. If we're just, say, take this building in front of you, for instance, if we're just repairing a corner post that is deteriorated and rotted at the bottom, we're going to stabilize the structure and remove a small amount of material from the exterior of it in order for us to repair that building. So we might pull off the clapboard, the corner boards, and some of the clapboards and some of the trim off of a corner so that we can do some repairs and then put everything back. Or it could be much more extensive dismantling. Slide, please. As you're going to see in the photos of this house, this is going to be a much more extensive dismantling. This is a current project for the preservation carpentry students where they are dismantling this home in its entirety to move it to a new location. Individual purchased this property, did not want the home, they just wanted the lot. And so the school was notified about this by a neighbor, a concerned citizen that didn't want the house to be munched up and stuffed into a landfill. And so the school stepped in and said, we would be happy to dismantle it and move it to a new location. And so that's being done for a client who's going to then restore the structure, adaptively reuse it as a new home. Slide, please. So here's the house being deconstructed. And we're just going to go through a couple of slides and then I'll talk about some of the background behind this. Go ahead, next slide, please. Next slide. So what you're looking at is a home, the original home, the front part of the house is from 1724 to 1725. And the back part of the house, the L off the back, is from 1860. All of this is being dismantled. It is being cataloged. It is being stored so that we can then rebuild this reconstruct this entire structure and give it a second life in a new location. It's only moving about 2.5 miles from its current location to a new piece of property. And this is a joint project between the carpentry students at school, which work on modern residential structures, and our preservation carpentry students The preservation students are doing the deconstruction and the restoration of it, and the carpentry students are putting an addition on the back of it that will have a modern kitchen, modern bathrooms, garage, all that kind of stuff. This is a nice shot of the inside of the building. Two of our students working with our architect on understanding how we're cataloging and how we're going to store and salvage all of these materials. And we are salvaging everything we can: siding, plank sheathing, the frame itself, the windows, the doors, brickwork, any paneling that was inside, wooden paneling that was inside the structure. When we've done this on projects in the past, we've tried to save as much as possible, including if we can break the building down into larger sections and save the plaster on the inside walls, we will attempt to do that as well. If we can move the structure whole, we will, or in large pieces, we will try to save as literally everything as possible inside the structure. Flooring, everything. In this building, everything's been dismantled, so we're taking everything apart. The entire frame, all the finishes inside and outside. The chimneys have been deconstructed down to a size that they can be put onto the back of a truck and moved away. Everything's been saved, and everything will be put back together when we reconstruct this building later this year into next year. Next slide, please. Again, same project, removing more and more of the structure, breaking it down so that we can assess everything, which was a really nice part of Katie's presentation. Understanding how to catalog everything, understanding how to evaluate the materials you're seeing, figuring out what is appropriate for salvage and reuse, what is inappropriate and should be done away with due to bug damage, rot, what have you. Next slide, please. And one more. Okay. There's a nice shot of the central chimney is covered in a black tarp. The frame has been fully exposed. Everything has been dismantled. We even took the capstones off of the foundation that you can see the frame is sitting on top of. Those were also collected off of the site and have been reused. Those are now currently in place on the new location. New foundation, new capstones are in place, ready for the timber frame to be restored and restood on its foundation, on its capstones. Next slide, please. And a lovely shot of the students and instructors out on the job site. This is now quite a ways into the dismantling of the structure. This is right before they started taking the rest of the frame down this past fall, 2 falls ago. Okay, next slide. All right, so what are we talking about from our perspective in our curriculum? Why are we choosing deconstruction over dismantling? Why are we choosing, deconstruction over demolition? A lot of it comes down to what are we doing? And our work is based around the Secretary for the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, which are listed there in front of you. Preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, or reconstruction. We have to stick to one of those when we do our work because they give us guidance on what's happening. Are we preserving a structure? Meaning, are we saving every piece of that structure's history? Not selectively, we save all of it if we're preserving a structure. The shag carpet from the 70s, terrible wallpaper, all of it gets saved. Doesn't matter what it is, because that's preservation in its truest sense. Or are we restoring a structure, taking it back to a specific time period? Are we trying to take it to 1725 or 1791 or 1863? What's the idea behind the work that's going into this? Rehabilitation and reconstruction tend to be these lovely hybrid areas where we can do some preservation work, some restoration work, but also potentially give a structure a new purpose. This building I've been showing you pictures of is a reconstruction where we've dismantled it. We're going to build it back up. We're going to restore a lot of the original fabric, but we're also creating a new life for this as a more modern home by having the addition off the back of it that will have a big kitchen and 2-car garage and all of those necessities of modern life. Selective demolition is still an option if we're if we're restoring a structure to a certain time period. So the house exists right now, but the original home is from 1782. Well, if we're restoring the structure to 1782, we need to remove any additions that were put on after that time period. And we're going to deconstruct or potentially demolish those sections depending on how severely they are deteriorated. Next slide, please. The pieces that are really important and in our curriculum, the first one says how to read historic fabrics and building materials. It's incredibly important for us when we're preserving or restoring a structure to understand how it was first built. But we can't always do that just by staring at it from the outside. We have to get into the building. We have to become intimate with what the building materials look like. There's a lot of scratch and sniff tests done to figure out what kind of paint, what kind of tools were used to cut the timber frame, what style of timber framing is it, what's the makeup of the plaster that's on the walls? Did it use local sand? Did it use lime from a local quarry? There's a lot that goes into understanding a structure before we can do a very accurate reconstruction or preservation on that building. All of this information allows us to do the work that's most appropriate for what our client is looking for, as well as for sticking to those standards that I mentioned on the previous slide. Next slide, please. The way we look at it is that we have these two main groups. We're either trying to salvage materials that we're going to use in the future on some other structure, not the structure they came off of. It's very similar to what Repurpose Savannah is doing, where we're going to claim materials off of the structure: doors, windows, floorboards, exterior board siding or sheathing, siding materials, bricks, and figure out if we can use those again on another structure. Sometimes it's based on the material itself. We can't find brick that matches current brick, modern brick. And so we're going to dive into our backlog of masonry and see if we have bricks that will match up, because we're restoring the brick on the exterior of a home or the chimney mass of a home, and we need the appropriate brick for that age. Or because it's a species we can't get anymore if it's wood, like chestnut. It's really hard for us to find large timber in chestnut. And so when we do find it in a structure and that structure is not going to be restored, it's not going to be rehabilitated, it's just going to be dismantled, we're going to take those parts and pieces and make sure we can find a new use for them in the future. Not only is this good for the materials, good for the environment, it's also appropriate to what we do as preservation carpenters. It's incredibly common to open up a building and start dismantling it and find out, oh, this house has timbers from a different structure. When we dendro date structures, we often find various dates for the age of the timbers because timbers are repurposed out of another building. 200 years ago, if you were putting an addition on your home, you wouldn't necessarily have all new lumber. You might use, we're not using this shed any longer, take the shed apart, use some of those timbers and putting an addition on the original home. That was a very common practice. The other side of it is the structural preservation, where we are truly taking down a building so that we can put it back up someplace else. Whether that's for a current client, like this project that you've seen pictures of, or it's just a good enough building that we want to save the whole structure, store it, and hope that we can find someone to take the structure in the future that is going to want us to rebuild it for them, reconstruct it for them, or adaptively reuse it for them. Next slide. These are some of the groups that we work with around historic preservation and some of the training, obviously ourselves. The Student Conservation Corps is a wonderful group in Massachusetts of young people learning historic preservation skills, working on public structures, and then going out and working in the industry. Obviously, the National Park Service has their Historic Preservation Training Center down in Frederick, Maryland. Historic Corps, if you don't know them, is a nonprofit based in just outside of Denver, technically. And they work on historic structures, mostly in National Park Service. That should be an NPS, not NPC. Whoops. And U.S. Forest Service land. So they tend to work in national parks, forest land on structures that are needing major repairs. And so they will send 2 staff members to then organize groups of volunteers for several weeks restoring structures. I worked for them on a project out in Lassen Volcanic National Park in Northern California. We restored I think at the time it was the oldest fire tower for the National Park Service, which was a masonry fire tower with a wooden top. And we restored that through HistoriCorps. Timber Framers Guild, Carpenters Without Borders is an international organization. Preservation Trades Network. Someone just said they just got back from volunteering with HistoriCorps. Good for you. Historic Deerfield does some amazing workshops on plaster repair and metals and hardware and lots of different topics. Really good, small, quick hit type workshops. And then on a longer format, similar to North Bennett Street, is American College of Building Arts has historic preservation programming in their curriculum down in our southern regions. I think that's my last slide. Thank you all for letting me speak with you today. Historic preservation is something that's incredibly important to North Bennett Street. We're the nation's oldest trade school. We're the first trade school in the country. And preservation carpentry is a vital piece of our curriculum and one of our full-time career programs, because we see such a need for it, especially in the New England area, but throughout the country. And dismantling or deconstructing a project is, we teach you how to use hand tools, and we teach you how to make wooden joinery. And then the next thing we teach you how to do is take apart a building, because you have to be able to understand structures through and through. And being able to dismantle a structure is the best way of learning how all this puzzle goes together, so you can then salvage these important buildings and recoup all of these resources that are so vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Brock. We appreciate that. And I love the passion on historic preservation. Next, we'll go to Randy Scott with Select Demo and Hancock Academy. Randy.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Randy Scott, Senior Vice President of Select Demolition. We're based in Salem, New Hampshire. We're 6th largest demolition contractor in the country. Currently, I believe we're in 10 states right now. We employ over 600 employees in the field. Next slide. Next slide. After getting involved with the CLF, I really started recognizing how much stuff we were disposed of. You know, we got out 15 million square feet of buildings a year. And after this realization of what was going on, and meeting this great group in CLF, we decided to hone in on this and figure out what we can start getting involved in recycling and repurposing, just to do our part. You know, one of the things we started, we started with the carpet recycling, where we hooked up with the manufacturers and we work on large volumes. We're working with ceiling tiles. We try to put ourselves at the top. Anything we do is the Maserati, we feel internally. So we've trained all our guys on the proper packaging, going out, and every time we pick up one of these new types of products, we're going to hone in at, specialize at it, and try to be the best doing it out there. So we do a lot of in-house training as we keep picking up these products, the new recycling products we do. Next slide. This is an example, and this is back to Brock. This was a project we did where we took the South Explorer up and got a hold of Christine Odell over there, and these guys just did an amazing job. And this is a great example of how, something that was getting thrown out, and this actually went out to a bunch of schools that we got a hold of, and they did amazing things with it. Next slide. This is an example of all the different companies we're working with, the disadvantaged companies that we get involved in. We work tightly with them to help them grow. A lot of them are smaller companies, and we bring them in, and it's part of the training and assistance we do. Then we also, we get highly involved as far as training. We sponsor a lot of programs. We'll get asked to get involved in a certain project, and we're a lot of the inner city stuff where they're need our assistance or oversight, and then a lot of the programs are helping training kids within the city, and then different schools where we'll bring in internships, where we have schools like Cristo Rey, and there's a couple other inner city schools that we work with. Next slide. This is a advanced detailed waste management plan, which, a lot of times LEED has these waste management plans, but that's probably only 5% of the projects out there. The hopes is this internally will be used on all projects, which really, back to, I think Katie was saying, nobody's tracking anything, and this way here could really track what's being recycled, repurposed versus diverted, and it was on every job. We'd have real time volumes of understanding what was happening with the stuff. And if they were to do this, I think a lot more stuff would lead to surplus and recycling, which leads into great things we can get done. Next slide. All right, this Hancock Academy is a nonprofit I have put together, and with realizing there's things for-profit companies couldn't do by utilizing tax write-offs. And the idea is to create a chain of nonprofit warehousing from Boston to Bangor to retain all this. Nobody has the space. Most of the people out there are limited to, they got 5,000 feet here, 20,000 here, and it's a large haul to just move all this stuff around. And the whole idea is to provide all this warehousing. And so, we can utilize the material for vocational projects. Then also have the inventory out there for repurposing project, and access to the architects and the designers will have access to all the inventory, so they can start developing new projects with the inventory. And then the remaining sales, we'll be selling materials to create grants for future opportunities for the projects and programs, and grants for the students themselves. Next slide. Actually, this is the long version of Hancock, which you can read later if you get the printout. Next slide. And that's just a little more on some of the things Hancock does. Next slide. So if you're a architect, designer, developer, state agency, city agency, you can get a hold of me. The number's up there. We can provide pre-construction planning, assist you in direction of recycling, repurposing. Please feel free to reach out. And as far as if you're a Fortune 500 company, a building owner, a contractor, and want to donate surplus, then you can contact Hancock Academy. Tried to get this brief. I did want to say thank you to Brock, Katie, and Dave. You did an amazing job. So I tried to keep this under the time limit. So I want to thank all you guys for your time. Have questions, please fire them out. And back to Michael.
Thank you, Randy. At this point, as the slide says, we'll ask all the other presenters to come back and open from Q&A. If you do have Q&A, please, I believe there's a Q&A function to this webinar. Feel free to ask your question. I'll start with one or two, but hopefully we can field any the audience has. So this is to all of the presenters. Really, what would you say are the first steps in an area to actually start the process of deconstruction, or at least training deconstruction if the area is kind of very demolition heavy, and wants to take that first step.
What was the question for, Mike?
Really looking towards first steps, especially looking at a lot of places in Mass. I know, Brock, you had some a list of some trainings out, but is there any kind of first logical steps that either municipalities or even if they're just owners or companies can take to really try to start the transition from demolition to more deconstruction?
This is Dave. I can take a shot at it.
Sure.
So one thing that we found is that a lot of communities will start with workforce development training, and they won't, at that point, they didn't or they haven't trained contractors. And so what ends up happening is you have workers that are trained and there's no one to hire them because you didn't think ahead to train contractors to do the work so that there would be work waiting. So what we start with, at least promote in every community, is that that contractors get trained first, so contractor training, and then you could do a workforce training after that where you're training workers and hopefully they get hired by the contractors. So those two things could be done simultaneously in some cases. So you have the workers and contractors interacting with each other and making it more likely that some of them will get hired because they'll get to know each other. So that is just one idea of a first step. And infrastructure, is another thing to consider. Like, are you doing this just because you want to see it done? Have you thought ahead? What happens to the materials? The infrastructure I'm referring to is like, is there a demand for the materials? Is there somewhere for the materials to go? And because once you start doing the training, the idea is that there would be a constant amount of work done after that would generate a lot of materials. So a couple of answers.
Another question, really, what do you all see as effective incentives to really help transition a workforce, whether it's through strict workforce training or really just incentivizing deconstruction, whether it's from a state or municipality?
Well, I definitely think they need to have an incentive for the deconstruction, Michael, and the repurpose, recycle. It's gonna start with that. Between, the incentive needs to be with the developers and the money at the end. And then it needs to be, back to why I put in the waste management plan. It needs to have the incentive. If they're gonna save money, you're gonna get their attention. If it doesn't make a difference, nothing's gonna happen.
Well, if I can jump on what Randy just said, is definitely incentive. And I can talk from the nonprofit side. Being that Repurpose is a nonprofit, we do offer tax deductible receipts for the entire structure. We partner with Green Mission Inc. out of DC, or a little bit south in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And they do our appraisals so that the client will get an estimated itemized list of materials that we're expecting to pull out that we can then compare to our actuals. And then once the project is complete, we deal with, the tax side and the legal side, so that the clients can get the tax deduction as well.
Hey, Katie, this is Dan Costello, and thank all of you for great presentations. I wonder, with your working with tax credits, does that include not only the value of the material that you're salvaging, but also the labor costs to recover it?
No. So, well, in our instance, the two are separate. So there's still an upfront charge on our end, right? Because my employees like to pay rent and have electricity in their homes, So then there's the upfront cost, and then once the project is finished, they get the tax deduction amount. So let's make up a number. Let's say I do a job for $5,000 or $50,000, but the tax deductible or the estimated tax amount, estimated material value could be like 100,000. So in theory, you're paying 100 or you're paying 50, but you're going to get 100 back or off of your tax, however that works with your CPA and your tax bracket. And so the delta is what you make.
Yeah. And Brock, that would be interesting for you if you're rebuilding a home, that it would involve, under that scenario, a very substantial tax credit for materials and labor to build a new house. So obviously
Correct.
the house is going to cost more than,
Right. And in
our, you get a big incentive to use those materials.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't know if we have such a mechanism in Massachusetts, do we? For the tax.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with what you all have going on as far as tax incentives and things, or if different municipalities offer different incentives where you all are, but worth some research, definitely, Dan.
Kathy, maybe speak up now about what the MassDEP does offer right now through any of the grants.
Well, we have recycling business development grants. They just ended a cycle, so there are some grants available up to $400,000 for projects that are awarded. There are targeted materials through that grant and building materials. It's not a program that I oversee directly. It's a sister group that does that, but building materials were part of that grant offering. We also have what we call micro grants. And Leah and Janice from my team are also here, and they oversee the micro grants, and they provide up to $10,000 for reuse and repair projects only. So not recycling, but anything related to reuse and repair. So smaller projects, but really to kind of get started. And we've seen like an explosion of interest in that space, even with, I believe there may be a few deconstruction related applications that came through this past year. I see Leah nodding on that one. The tax incentive piece, I know that we had a webinar, one of our previous webinars in this kind of series that we've done, had someone from the state's Department of Historic Preservation speaking to some historic preservation tax credits. But from our end, that's not something that DEP has as tax credits, but certainly we can explore further, because there may be another agency that offers something that might be more in line with what Katie shared from what's happening in Savannah. So thank you.
Yeah, it would seem like there's some research, obviously, that would have to be done to, say, the owner of the building that Brock is reconstructing, to have the incentives between grants and tax credits to have a home built that preserves the integrity and materials of 1780s house, and they get some financial incentive to do it. It's quite an intriguing stimulus for this whole program. I would think very much a stimulus.
Continuing on with some of the questions we're seeing. Melissa Wenzel out of the Minnesota Pollution Control wanted to ask, how do we get from trained deconstruction practitioners to companies and organizations with these teams to carry out this work long term? Really, how do we go from, if we do have a team or two of these deconstruction contractors, to really build that on, to really start shifting in the industry? Anyone have any thoughts?
Well, I think, Michael, in the commercial world, once again, if it's really pushed, we need the end places to bring all.
Warehouse.
So as we're creating that, and we come up with places to bring it all, and then it's mandated that you do it. I mean, then the training will come. If we're given a mission to move forward, and we can have places to bring these materials, then us contractors will follow suit. You know, and I know Dan does quite a bit of this too, you know, and so there are people out there engaged into making this happen, and to get the rest of the people engaged, they just gotta force the amount of what's gonna be repurposed and recycled, you know?
Yeah, you need an infrastructure that includes warehousing and processing of the material and open to ready markets. Not every piece of material that's salvaged under deconstruction is going back into the use that it came from. So you need to have a marketplace for people to go and buy used materials.
Can I
Brock,
add something?
I had a question for you, Brock, with that building that you had. It certainly had lovely timber in it, great wood. You're fortunate that the roof lasted that long and it was well protected. But in some of the design for reconstruction seminars that I participate in, the idea of using barcoding on every member to locate it and be able to allocate where it goes back is quite popular. Have you thought about that, or do you use that in a reconstruction?
We don't use barcoding. We're a little old school. We use a brass tag.
Okay,
All of our structures are tagged with a brass number tag, and that number tag corresponds to a location for the framing member in the structure and for everything else.
even like that wall sheathing that you had and the flooring.
Exactly.
It would all be.
Yeah. So some of that's it's a waste of energy tagging it for location. In terms of like the order of the boards going up the wall, sometimes we just label them for the east, west, north, south walls that they were on, as opposed to the order up the wall. But they will get things like corner boards, trim pieces, interior trim, that will get tagged for a specific location, so that it goes back in the same spot. And the timber, certainly, because the structure of that age, 1725, is scribed together. It's the style of timber framing is called scribal timber framing, and it has to go back the same way. It won't fit in another form. It won't end up being the same structure. It'll be out of plumb or square if we try to put it back in a different order of parts and pieces.
That house was in great shape, and how's it going back together?
It's going to go back and look as close as we can get it as to how it looked when we took it down.
Have you started rebuilding it?
They've started repairing it. So the floor system on the first floor needs quite a lot of repair and replacement. The upper frame for the timber frame is in great shape, and so that's all just having minor repairs, spot repairs done to it, so that it can be reassembled. They're hoping to have the original timber frame all up and standing by the end of the summer.
That was really neat the way you saved the granite capstones for it too.
Yep, and that was those are another example of something that we haven't put them back in the exact same orientation that they were in, but they are back on top of a new concrete foundation, and they are close to being exactly how they were when they were dismantled from the original structure.
Somewhat level and square, huh?
Yeah.
I'm going to just jump in right here. This is so fascinating. I just wanted to note that we have about 9 minutes left. There are some questions both in the Q&A and the chat. So I wanted to make sure we gave a little time to that as well.
Yeah. Can this is Dave. Can I help answer the last question of Melissa?
Sure, Dave. Yes.
I'm not sure
please.
we got that.
Okay.
Here's an important point for everybody. You can't segment out workforce training. You can't just do deconstruction. You can't just run a retail store. You have to do everything all at once. It is an independent system. You can't generate supply without having demand, and you can't create jobs without having something for people to do. or companies for them to work with. So there isn't one solution. There isn't one thing that you can focus on. You have to focus on everything all at the same time. So our solution was to try and build up infrastructure in a sort of a growing rate, where the workers are trained at the rate that the industry is growing, and you're deconstructing buildings, and you are, when you have an ordinance, you can have milestones, you can have certain aspects of it that become active at a certain time, so you can grow it at a rate that makes sense. Where, like Portland, where they change the year. So there isn't one thing that you can do that will make it work. You have to pretty much be paying attention to all the aspects all at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I jump in real quick?
Of course, yes.
And Lusk, you asked in the Q&A if a home is to be demolished or partly demolished, who suggests to the owners to deconstruct, and is the homeowner given any company names? From my experience as a preservation contractor in Massachusetts, there's no real guide to this. A building inspector in town isn't going to suggest demolition over deconstruction. They're not going to give you any influence one way or the other. And a contractor, depending on the type of contractor, meaning the type of work they do, they're looking to remove a structure as quickly as possible so that they can start building the next structure. Dismantling is not a fast process. It's not, in my opinion, that slow either, but it's certainly not as fast as an excavator with a bucket on the end of it, when a house can be gone in 2 days or a day. It's just simply going to be a slower process, dismantling or deconstructing a home. And so most contractors in modern residential work are not going to be quite as forthcoming with the idea of, oh, hey, this is a pretty cool building. You may want to consider dismantling this. Usually they're going to say, if we're taking the whole building down, we'd rather take the whole building down as quickly as possible so we can get a foundation in. There are 4 levels of inspections needed during the foundation work. So I need to get on that as quickly as possible so I can move directly into building the new property that you want me to build. So it's unfortunately not the easiest thing to navigate right now. This is the feedback we're getting from most of the clients that work with us at North Bench Street or that I've worked with personally.
I think just to add in real quick, and this could be the final question, is are there any resources? So to the point that was just brought up, sometimes there's ignorance of, do resources exist, and if there are, how do I find them? I think I would ask as one final question in the group, are there any lists or resources or kind of guides that are out there for either residential or commercial to find what currently does exist?
I can tell you that in New York City right now, we've been tasked with creating a list, just as you described, something that lists all of the recycling, all of the reuse, all of the deconstruction, all of the repair and remanufacturing businesses in the entire region. And we're going to take everybody's lists that already exist, that are often static, where you create a list on January 1st, 2040, whatever. And then if you don't update that list, then it becomes old and stale. So we're going to take everybody's lists and try and create a new list that will be up to date, at least for now. So that's one thing that's coming.
In the short term, Anne, my answer would be, well, you've got my email now. Feel free to shoot an email, and I can tell you if there's somebody that works in the area that takes down houses in a humane way. But that's about as best as a resource as I have for you right now, in terms of a smaller project style, like a small residential property.
Right, and I did want to say, I was talking to Abby Massaro yesterday at CET, and they're always updating their list. And they're another one to contact where they've put together a greater New England list that they're working on. And the same thing Brock said, you know, you have my number, my email, you need any pre-planning, surveys, etc. I'm here. I work 24/7, so feel free to call me.
Well, and can I add to that? I was just going to say Build Reuse is a pretty great resource, and they might have on a national level a little bit more insight into who is near other people outside of Massachusetts as well. And I know Melissa is a part of Build Reuse, and she's a brilliant resource as well.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, there's a reinvigoration of deconstruction practitioners training and certification and all that kind of stuff. I'm not part of that team, but I'm aware of it as a board member from Build Reuse. Katie, hi.
Okay.
Miss you.
I miss you too.
It's so great to have this network and you all here in the room together. Thank you so much. We've learned so much from you, Melissa, and others on the call. It's really, really inspiring and great. We appreciate it. Any other question? That was the last question, Michael. I think you said we probably had time for, right? Because I need to just wrap it up. We have like another minute or two. I think I will move ahead unless there's something that's you feel like you really want to get out there.
The only thing I'll mention is I put the links in the chat, but the All for Reuse ecosystem map does exist. I would say it's a bit like Tinder. It's more effective the more people who use it and contribute to it. So that does exist right now, and you can search by region. And then I linked it a little earlier, but the Build Reuse does have a wiki, which has a lot of different resources that if you're a Build Reuse member, you can add to, but anyone can kind of use some of the resources and seek. They do have guides, policy guides, case studies for deconstruction. So I would ask, I would tell everyone if you do want some initial first steps to look there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I know that we want to in Massachusetts go, in the coming months, we want to build our resource toolkit, I guess you could say, make that more robust as well. And we gather a lot of the information from these meetings to identify the needs and what we can do as a state. I'm just going to go through the last slide or two. I want to let folks know that our next steps after this meeting is we're going to do a relatively brief, kind of another virtual meeting in September, but the idea of that meeting is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be quite so much the webinar style as you've seen so far, but what it will be about really is setting the stage for what we are starting to plan for in the fall, later in the fall, which will be an in-person workshop. And this is our planning team for this deconstruction work group together discerned that they feel like it's the time to really kind of transition into action with a lot of what we've learned. So the idea is to do this in-person workshop later in the fall where we will engage with municipalities that are ready to take the next step. We want to make sure that we have all the right people who need to be at that table and in that room so that we can hear about what will help make this work and what will move the needle. And we will do our best to elicit feedback from the different sectors that are represented there. What do they need? What are their obstacles? What are the opportunities there? Might it be ordinances, policies? What kind of resources are you looking for? What already exists? And really try to bring that to fruition. So I'm just going to ask you all to stay tuned. We will let you know both about this kind of the preparatory webinar or that meeting that we'll have in September with an in-person meeting later this fall. Because Dan Costello is on the line, I just want to say that photo is from the dismantling that we saw at one of your sites. It must have been last summer, maybe now. But
yeah, I thought I recognized it, Kathy. Yes.
Like that grapple still got my attention. How it can just so.
Are you going to have a field? Are you anticipating a field trip for this this follow-up meeting?
We're looking for a location where we can hold a lot of people. So if people have ideas in Massachusetts, centrally located would be great, certainly Metro West, so that it's not too far a haul so people can come from different parts of the state, but we will be inviting in folks. We have a number of communities that have already expressed their desire to take some next steps and like pen to paper and would like some help with the process. And so the idea is to kind of gather up the experts that we know and bring people into the room and let's do this. I don't know if you'd call that a field trip, but it definitely will be an in-person workshop. If anybody else on the planning team here would like to add to that, feel free to
If
chime in.
anybody
But
knows, Randy, you would know too in your travels, if you see a building that might be a good candidate that would be coming up in that time frame, then we could stage a deconstruction event and just show what it looks like. So it may be very interesting, Kathy.
very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's stay connected. I will just say, I want to thank the speakers. I learned a lot today. This was, a topic that's like, we really haven't even started to like open the door on in many ways. And so I'm really grateful to get the range of speakers that we had today. Thank you so much for committing your time to this. I suspect that more questions have emerged as a result of this conversation. So I hope you'll stay connected with us and that we can reach out to you as well. As mentioned, this recording, as well as the presentations, get posted on DEP's website in the coming weeks. And then I will close it here.